All this began with a Fox News report that a high-ranking Obama official had requested the unmasking of the names of Trump officials caught up in surveillance. That was followed by Bloomberg News. Bloomberg News naming President Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, as the official who requested the unmasking, citing a leak from U.S. officials.
So what is unmasking? Is it where a U.S. official requests the identity of an otherwise unnamed American caught up in surveillance of foreigners? Unmasking is not the same as leaking because an unmasked identity is only revealed to officials authorized to know. Now, for more on unmasking and the response from Susan Rice, let's bring in CNN's Jim Sciutto in Washington.
Dave and Christine, a source close to Ambassador Susan Rice tells me that the claims that she improperly unmasked the names of U.S. citizens caught up in surveillance is, in a word, false. That's coming from Ambassador Rice. But I've also spoken to former senior intelligence officials from both Democratic and Republican administrations to ask them about the process of unmasking. Is it unusual? Is it illegal? And their answer is unanimously no, not unusual, not illegal. They say a couple of things. One, the law allows this. Two, for it to happen, the official requests it, but the U.S. intelligence community has to approve that request. Oftentimes it is approved because that intelligence official wants to provide more information to the senior national security official. As they're reading intelligence reports, they want to know more about what they mean, the significance. That information is shared only between the briefer from the intelligence community and that official. It's not more widely disseminated. Now, it's possible that that official could do that him or herself, but by the nature of it, it is only exchanged one-to-one. There are open questions here. How extensive was the unmasking? What was the justification for it? But this we know, this I know from speaking to multiple intelligence officials, that this practice is not unusual. It happens. And two, it's certainly not illegal. There are protocols for this specifically established after 9/11 to allow for this unmasking under certain rules. Christine and Dave?
All right, Jim Sciutto had a very busy day yesterday working his sources, trying to get clarity on all that. Thank you for that, Jim. The web of connections between the president, his associates, and Russia seems to be spreading. The Washington Post reporting on a secret meeting in early January between a Russian connected to President Vladimir Putin and the founder of the Blackwater security firm, Eric Prince.
The meeting took place on the isolated Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean. The Post sources saying the meeting was an attempt to set up a back-channel line of communication between the Kremlin and President-elect Trump. Eric Prince was not a part of the Trump campaign or transition, but he does have ties to Trump's inner circle, including chief strategist Steve Bannon. Prince's sister, Betsy DeVos, is Secretary of Education. The White House says it was not aware of any meetings Prince had, and a spokesman for Prince calls the claim of a connection, quote, a complete fabrication.
Yeah, and the Washington Post saying it was the United Arab Emirates involved in connecting those two. So a fascinating piece in the Washington Post this morning. The House Intelligence Committee plans to meet at noon today with the future of its Russia investigation hanging in the balance. The full committee convened last night for the first time since its top Democrat, Adam Schiff, called on the Republican chairman Devin Nunes to accuse himself. The topic of Russia and its alleged ties to the Trump administration will be on the table this afternoon. You might recall that trip to the White House by Nunes 2 weeks ago. It idled the committee and called into question the committee's ability to proceed with a credible investigation.
All right, to help break it all down this morning, political analyst Ellis Hennigan, author of Trump's America column for the Metro papers, and CNN political analyst David Drucker, senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, join us. Good morning to
both.
Guys.
Thanks for getting up early.
Morning.
Good to see you both. All right, some say that this is an attempt to distract by President Trump. What say you, Dave Drucker?
Well, I think time will tell. Look, I think the Republicans and Democrats sort of, at least in the House, have sequestered themselves into their corners, and Democrats want to focus on Russian meddling and possible collusion between Trump associates and Vladimir Putin, and Republicans want to focus on leaks that they think are improper and out of bounds, though, at least for the moment, legal. And I don't know why it can't all be true. Or maybe none of it's true. So what we know and what we think is pretty obvious is that Russia meddled in the 2016 election. And it does appear, and I think this is clear from the fact that Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, has not debunked any of what Nunes said he looked at, because they've now looked at the same documents, that there was unmasking to look at communications of Trump associates swept up in these communications. And so the question is, was it as improper as Chairman Nunes and a lot of Republicans believe? We haven't heard yet from Adam Schiff whether or not he believes it was improper or not. And maybe he'll say it wasn't. But we haven't heard yet.
He has said that what he has seen, he thinks the committee can see. You know, he wants the committee to see everything that he has seen. I want to listen on the Susan Rice angle. I think Ambassador Rice angle. I think this is sort of the new information from yesterday that the president and his associates have really jumped on. But John McCain spoke to Mani Raju about Susan Rice and this allegation that she may be the one who unmasked these names. Let's listen to what he said.
I have not been made aware, but if it's the case, of course, it's just dereliction of duty.
So there are cases where you say it's not improper and not illegal, or sometimes it may be improper. The whole unmasking thing.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that word a second. Unmasking. I mean, it sounds so horrible, doesn't it? I mean, my goodness, someone was unmasked. But when you really get into it, this is the way our intelligence system works, or the way when wiretaps are run on foreign folks, and they happen to catch Americans, somehow someone talking about an American or speaking to an American, it's a perfectly appropriate, legal, and routine process to say, well, you know, maybe some officials, not everyone in the public, but some officials may need to know who this is, what they're talking about, and why. So it could be abused, but I don't think we have any evidence yet that it has been.
Right.
Do you see any?
Could be okay if it was the interest of national security. If it's purely political, we have a problem. But the backdrop of this, David, is the integrity, the credibility of Susan Rice, given what she said on PBS on March 22nd. Listen.
I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Nunes on that count today.
Well, I think it depends on what the meaning of this is.
And the question was about surveillance of Trump transition officials.
But that, you know, this could mean all sorts of things. You know, was she the one that requested the unmasking, and what does she do with the information? Look, imagine 8 years ago, you have incoming President Barack Obama, limited national security experience, had traveled to Berlin to give a big, huge speech. Republicans were ridiculing him because, you know, as a citizen of the world, quote unquote. And then we find out that George W. Bush's outgoing national security advisor had done the same thing. I think Democrats would have been up in arms, even if it would have been legal, and they probably would have said it was improper. And we know that over the years, it's mostly been Democrats that have been concerned about the FISA laws being abused, not Republicans. So my point in saying this is that I think we need more information about what motivated this and what was done with it. Obviously, in this case, we have an unusual situation where we're concerned about a foreign adversary meddling in our elections and all that could have entailed. But before we knock this down and say that, oh, there's nothing to see here, I think we need to know more about it.
Devin Nunes said it wasn't about Russia. So imagine the scenario, and this is all we can do, actually, because there's a lot of information we don't have, where you have a foreign adversary, not Russia, spying on the Trump Tower and discussing it amongst foreign nationals. We hear it, and Susan Rice or whoever decides that, wait, the intelligence community needs to know that this potential enemy is tapped right into Trump Tower.
Yes, and in hindsight, let's don't forget, I mean, it's increasingly looking like if the Obama administration made a mistake in all of this stuff, it may be that they focused too little on it. Not that they were overly dogged or trying to get to the bottom of it, but it's that they didn't understand early enough, frankly, how severe this Russian threat to our democracy was. And so we may be in a little bit of a contradiction here if we say, whoa, hold on a second, don't be unmasking these people. Actually, we need to know more, don't we?
And this story, like everything else, strict party lines, partisan, how you view it depends on where you stand politically, as does the Supreme Court nomination of Neil Gorsuch, because that looks like it's headed, David, to the nuclear option. It looks like they will filibuster this on the left. They will not have the 60 votes. How politically risky is this play for Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, given that they could have another opening in the Trump administration, which could shift the philosophical balance of the entire court for decades?
And Democrats are in a tough spot because the base of the Democratic Party reminds me so much of the base of the Republican Party during the Obama years. They just want Democrats to say no and fight every step of the way. Even if you can make an argument that you should be strategic about how you fight and when you fight, they don't care. They don't want to hear about it. And, you know, from the Democrats' point of view, they are not going to really support the philosophy of a right-of-center judge, and Gorsuch is a solid conservative. So then you look ahead to the next Supreme Court nominee. You could make an argument that if Democrats at least provided the votes to kill the filibuster and then they voted against this on his confirmation and final passage, maybe they would be in a position to influence Trump into nominating somebody next time around that was right of center, but not like far right of center. But, you know, on the other hand, if you look at the Gorsuch nomination and you look at the fact that the Supreme Court is such an important issue for Republicans when it comes to Trump, and he has been so transactional about this, wouldn't you probably get another Gorsuch? Yeah, you probably would.
And what's the cost? I mean, honestly, yes, it's going to
filibuster?
Yes, I mean, aren't they going to get slammed either way? Right? I mean, they're not going to control who Trump is putting on the court. The guy's going to get through most likely.
They might next time.
But
and
why?
Replacing Kennedy.
But why does playing nicely this time? Does that really get you in it?
General Jeff Sessions ordering a review of all agreements made with troubled departments. He wants to make sure they don't conflict with the president's goal of promoting officer safety and morale while fighting violent crime. Since 2009, the Justice Department has conducted 25 investigations into law enforcement agencies and is currently enforcing 14 consent decrees and agreements.
Right, the future of internet privacy in question this morning. The White House following through, killing off a series of Obama-era privacy rules. President Trump signing into law a repeal of protections that would have required internet service providers to get your permission before collecting and sharing your data. So why block the rules? Well, Trump-appointed FCC Chairman Ajit Pai says, quote, those flawed privacy rules, which never went into effect, they were designed to benefit one group of favored companies, not online consumers. Here are the 3 buckets of data that internet service providers are collecting that they can now share without you knowing. Your browsing history, your app usage, and your geolocation. Now, most online programs will not block ISPs from collecting this data. You'll have to get a VPN, a virtual private network, or a Tor program to do that if you want to try to keep a hold of that.
Is that easily done?
Look, I'm not the person to ask.
Okay.
But you know, I have been asking about it. We're talking about medical records, financial records. I mean, there's stuff there that is, you know, private.
Oh boy. All right, well, some redemption for North Carolina winning the national championship 1 year after losing the title on a buzzer beater. The Tar Heels beating Gonzaga 71-65 in Phoenix Monday night. The game was close throughout, though. UNC trailed at half. They scored the first 8 points of the second half and the last 8 points of the game to close out the victory. This is the 6th national title in North Carolina's storied history, 3rd since 2005. The win setting off a wild celebration. The school posting this awesome real-time, time-lapse video of Carolina students and the fans swarming the streets there in Chapel Hill. They get it there in Chapel Hill. They've celebrated a couple of times. Pretty peaceful partying going on
and we are
late last night.
Congratulations, everybody. All right, 19 minutes past the hour.
Emerge.
Democrats now with enough support to filibuster the president's Supreme Court nominee. Will Republicans change the Senate forever and change the rules to get Neil Gorsuch on the bench?
And police reforms nationwide coming under review. Why does the Attorney General want to examine changes made under the previous administration? Welcome back to Early Start, everybody. I'm Dave Brady.
Oh, it's only Tuesday. I'm Christine Romans. It is 31 minutes past the hour. Amid the constant drip of connections between the president's associates in Russia, one topic that has received some attention but not much is unmasking. Now the president is doing his best to make unmasking sound illegal, firing off a barrage of tweets that seem aimed at a scandal to distract from potentially a real one.
All right, so where did this all start? With the Fox News report that a high-ranking Obama official had requested the unmasking of the names of Trump officials caught up in surveillance. That was followed by a Bloomberg News report naming President Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, as the official who requested this unmasking, citing U.S. officials. So
what is unmasking? It is where a U.S. official requests the identity of an otherwise unnamed American caught up in the surveillance of foreigners. But unmasking is not the same as leaking. It is not disseminated widely. An unmasked identity is only revealed to officials authorized to know within the intelligence community. For more now on unmasking and the response from Susan Rice, let's bring in CNN's Jim Sciutto in Washington.
Dave and Christine, a source close to Ambassador Susan Rice tells me that the claims that she improperly unmasked the names of U.S. citizens caught up in surveillance is, in a word, false. That's coming from Ambassador Rice. But I've also spoken to former senior intelligence officials from both Democratic and Republican administrations to ask them about the process of unmasking. Is it unusual? Is it illegal? And their answer is unanimously no, not unusual, not illegal. They say a couple of things. One, the law allows this. Two, for it to happen, the official requests it, but the U.S. intelligence community has to approve that request. Oftentimes it is approved because that intelligence official wants to provide more information to the senior national security official. As they're reading intelligence reports, they want to know more about what they mean, the significance. That information is shared only between the briefer from the intelligence community and that official. It's not more widely disseminated. Now, it's possible that that official could do that him or herself, but by the nature of it, it is only exchanged one-to-one. There are open questions here. How extensive was the unmasking? What was the justification for it? But this we know, this I know from speaking to multiple intelligence officials, that this practice is not unusual. It happens. And two, it's certainly not illegal. There are protocols for this specifically established after 9/11 to allow for this unmasking under certain rules. Christine and Dave?
A lot there. Thank you, Jim. The web of connections between the president, his associates, and Russia seems to be spreading further this morning, according to a Washington Post report. This about a secret meeting in early January between a Russian connected to President Vladimir Putin and the founder of the Blackwater security firm, Eric Prince.
This meeting took place on the isolated Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean. The Washington Post sources saying the meeting was an attempt to set up a back-channel line of communication between the Kremlin and President-elect Trump. Eric Prince was not a part of the Trump campaign or the transition, but he does have ties to Trump's inner circle, including chief strategist Steve Bannon. Prince's sister, Betsy DeVos, is Secretary of Education. The White House says it was not aware of any meetings Prince had, and a spokesman for Prince calls the claim of any connection, quote, a complete fabrication.
Meanwhile, the House Intelligence Committee plans to meet today at noon with the future of its Russia investigation hanging in the balance. The full committee convened last night for the first time since its top Democrat, Adam Schiff, called on Republican Chairman Devin Nunes to recuse himself. The topic of Russia and its alleged ties to the Trump administration will be on the table this afternoon. That trip to the White House by Nunes 2 weeks ago idled the committee and called into question its ability to proceed with a credible investigation.
All right, help break it all down this morning. Political analyst Ellis Hennigan, author of the Trump's America column for the Metro papers, and CNN political analyst David Drucker, senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning, guys.
Let's talk about unmasking versus leaking and this latest sort of tweet storm from the president. Is this a distraction from the slow work of in these committees, David Drucker? Or is this really important to get down to the bottom of this?
Look, the House Intelligence Committee was always looking at two things. One was Russian meddling and the possibility of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives, and leaking, which Republicans from the very beginning have been very concerned about. And this, I think, particularly came to the fore when Michael Flynn, the story was broken by the Washington Post, had been in contact with the Russian ambassador, had never disclosed this. It turned out he didn't tell the vice president, and that led to his resignation. But what Republicans focused on throughout that whole thing was how did this get into the public sphere?
Right.
And they were concerned about leaking that came from intelligence gathering of foreign nationals. So that's where Republicans in the House have been. Democrats have been much more focused on Russian meddling and possible collusion, and we saw in that open hearing both sides picking sides, with Republicans doing nothing but asking questions about leaks, and Democrats doing nothing about asking questions about, whether or not Colonel what's his name, and he had the candlestick in another, in another room, and they were trying to connect dots that they, at least in that hearing, weren't able to connect. So I think the question is, are both going to be proven right? Is everybody going to be proven wrong? But there are two issues that matter here. One is, were FISA laws followed properly? That's very important, especially because some FISA laws, the ability to do a lot of this stuff is up for reauthorization at the end of the year. Will you have the votes? And number two, this Russia thing is a real thing, at least in terms of meddling. We know Russia meddled, and it's pretty clear that they picked sides in the election. The question that what we don't know and what may never turn out to be true was whether there was collusion.
Colonel whoever with a candlestick. I would say a game of Clue is much more fun.
We do need to know.
Our viewers can help with that, by the way.
Perhaps. We do need to know why Susan Rice asked for these officials unmasked. Was it in the name of national security? If so, no big problem. But I want to ask you, does Susan Rice have a credibility issue based on what she said about Trump transition officials being surveilled? Listen.
I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Yunus on that count today.
Is there a credibility problem there?
I think it falls into the could be, maybe yeah, maybe no. I mean, you just need to know more about it. First of all, what explicitly was she referring to in that case? I mean, listen, David's right.
Surveillance of Trump transition officials.
But focus on this for a second. I mean, we really are in two teams on this thing, right? I mean, if you start out thinking that Susan Rice is a liar, and there are folks in our country who feel like that, this is going to prove that she did. If you're on the other side of it and you think, you know what, the Obama administration really did need to get to the bottom of this. We really did need to know whether the Russians were hacking into our elections, and if so, how.
This was not related to Russia.
Of course,
we do know that.
Yeah, I understand that. But that discussion obviously is the way this thing is breaking down. I think it's gotten very tribal in a hurry.
Let's switch and talk about another tribal in a hurry, and that is the Gorsuch nomination, the Supreme Court nomination. Are we, David Drucker? I mean, are they going to change, history in the Senate this week?
Well, look, Republicans would argue that they're just furthering the work of Harry Reid. In 2013, for the first time, used the nuclear option, which means he broke the rules of the Senate, requiring so many votes to change the rules. So, and that affected, obviously, all executive branch nominees except for the Supreme Court. Republicans are going to seat Neil Gorsuch. If it takes the nuclear option, they will do it. They kept Merrick Garland off the Supreme Court last year. They made a deal with their voters that if you elect Trump, even though you're skeptical of him and you're not sure about him, you will get a conservative Supreme Court justice. Republicans in the Senate and the House, for that matter, they don't know really what they're going to end up getting with Trump over the next 4 years, but they know this. They're going to get Neil Gorsuch, who is going to replace Antonin Scalia and keep that seat conservative for a generation. There's no way, given there's been no skeletons and there's no reason not to see them, they're going to let a filibuster block. There's just no way.
Well, it was the Obama Solicitor General that introduced Gorsuch on this court and wrote a lengthy op-ed about why they should approve him. But what are the implications, Ellis, if in fact the nuclear option is utilized here, the implications on the Supreme Court in the future and on any legislation on a bipartisan fashion for the next 3 or 4 years?
Your point is that the Senate is different and in some ways busted. I think that's undeniably true. But what I don't understand strategically is what exactly do Democrats lose if they hold the line on this, right? We're not going to get any kind of a different nominee next time. There's no suggestion that you're raising objections. Why do you believe that?
Because the perception is that the moderate senators will not go nuclear with someone who is extreme, someone who is far to the right of Neil Gorsuch, which he is not by most accounts, including the Bar Association.
You see, but I just don't think in this case that you get much for playing nicely. I understand it would be nice to maintain these traditions into the distant future, but Dave, I got to tell you, this stuff is pretty busted already, and the idea of the great comedy is going to arrive in some future day. I don't know. You're a bigger optimist than I am, I guess. You are a cheerful guy, by the way.
Well, I will say my whole career covering Washington and business, the number of times we've gone around and said bipartisanship is dead, bipartisanship is dead. It's been dead as long as I've been covering it, so just variations of dead.
There's never been a partisan filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee.
You're right. This is a different kind of dead.
It'll be the first and the last.
Thanks, David Drucker, Ellis Huntington. Nice to see both of you.
Thank you, guys. All right, police reforms enacted by the Obama administration could be in jeopardy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions ordering a review of all agreements made with troubled departments. He wants to make sure they don't conflict with the president's goal of promoting officer safety and morale while fighting violent crime. Since 2009, the Justice Department has conducted 25 investigations into law enforcement agencies and is currently enforcing 14 consent decrees and agreements.
All right, 42 minutes past the hour. It is April, and today is Equal Pay Day. What is that? The significance of equal pay. To earn the same amount as their male counterparts make in 1 year, women have to work that 1 year and then all the way till April of the next year. That extra time ends today. Women earn about 80 cents for every dollar men make, according to Census Bureau statistics. It works out to be a little more than $10,000 less per year. For a 20-year-old entering the workforce, it amounts to $418,000 over a 40-year career. Now, the pay gap changes dramatically when you factor in race. Hispanic women earn just 54 cents compared to what a white male earns. African-American women make 63 cents on the dollar. Asian women have the narrowest gap, 85 cents. This is according to the National Women's Law Center. So what's being done about it? Well, the gap has been closing slowly over the past 20 years, but experts say really only Congress has the power to act on a national scale. Companies are also partially responsible. But
Democratic colleagues, this is going to be very bad.
The president and I have faith. Congress is going to step up and do the right thing.
There is a solid idea that was offered. We're certainly encouraged.
It's a pipe dream. The Freedom Caucus does not hold the key to this.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It is Tuesday, April 4th, 6 o'clock here in New York. Up first, President Trump trying to deflect again from the expanding web of ties between his team and Russia. The president alleging that former National Security Advisor Susan Rice improperly unmasked the identity of Trump associates who were caught up in surveillance of foreign targets.
All right, so President Trump wants you to believe he is the victim of a crooked scheme. Those are his words. And here are our words. There is no evidence of any wrongdoing. And in fact, if anything, the NSA asking for identities was a reflection of exactly how much traffic there was involving Trump people and foreign players. The White House blasting the press for not reporting on another fake scandal being peddled by right-wing media. That is day 75 of the Trump presidency, and we do have it covered. Let's begin with CNN's Jim Sciutto live in Washington. Busy night for you, my friend.
No question. Listen, we're in a space where intelligence is routinely politicized, but even the terms of intelligence are deliberately distorted. I've spoken to the most senior former intelligence officials from both Republican and Democratic administrations. They say definitively unmasking is not leaking. It is routine. It is something that senior national security officials do on a regular basis to get a better understanding of the intelligence reports they see every day. It is legal. There are protocols put in place since 9/11 to allow this to happen. It cannot be done alone. It requires the approval of the intelligence community, and that information is not widely disseminated. It's between the briefer and that senior national security official, whoever it is, including Secretary Rice. I've spoken to people close to Secretary Rice. It is their position that she did not, that reports that she improperly unmasked identities are, in their words, false. This appears to be the latest attempt to justify President Trump's unfounded claim that President Obama surveilled him.
Former President Barack Obama's National Security Advisor Susan Rice at the center of President Trump's latest attempt to renew his unproven wiretapping claim and divert attention away from his team's contacts with Russia. President Trump seizing on conservative media reports that claim that Ambassador Rice unmasked the names of Trump transition officials caught up in routine surveillance.
At its core is this was surveillance for apparently political reasons.
Tweeting that he was spied on before the nomination and calling it a crooked scheme. A source close to Rice telling CNN that the allegations that she did anything unusual or improper, false. The White House, meanwhile, blasting the media for ignoring this ginned-up scandal.
From a media standpoint, somewhat intrigued by the lack of interest that we've seen in some of these public revelations and reporting that has gone in that direction that we've seen in some of the other directions that we've seen.
As officials stress that unmasking names in intelligence reports is a routine procedure, something different from leaking this information to the press.
If somebody feels that there's intelligence value, and of course there's a whole series of procedures that you have to go through and lawyers look over your shoulder, so there's nothing at all unusual about unmasking.
The administration's latest justification, a far cry from President Trump's initial claim 1 month ago that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower, an accusation that Mr. Trump has since attempted to redefine.
That really covers surveillance and many other things.
And justify, even after his own FBI director refuted the claim.
I think you're going to find some very interesting items coming to the forefront over the next 2 weeks.
Last week, the Trump administration also tried to distort comments made by a former Obama defense official Evelyn Farkas.
Dr. Farkas's admissions alone are devastating.
This to substantiate Trump's contention that Obama spied on him. Farkas says her comments were wildly misinterpreted. And the week before that, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes got wrapped up in the White House diversion.
The president needs to know that these intelligence reports are out there.
Briefing the commander-in-chief and the media before his own committee about classified information of incidental collection on the president's associates.
I very much appreciated the fact that they found what they found.
Trump calling Nunes' announcement vindication. Days later, it turns out that officials inside Trump's White House were the original source of the documents shown to Nunes.
We believe that this is nothing more than just an effort to roll more smoke bombs into an investigation that was making progress.
Now, there are legitimate questions about unmasking. How easy does the law allow officials to unmask the names of Americans incidentally caught up in the surveillance of foreigners? Those are legitimate questions, but based on what we know now, there is nothing unusual or certainly illegal about the unmasking done by former Obama officials. Chris and Allison?
And that's part of the problem here, right? First of all, Jimmy, thank you very much for laying it out for us this morning. Stay with us now because it's an important conversation. And as Jim's pointing out, there's this conflation of legitimate issues and applying them to a situation where they don't bear any relevance. Let's discuss now. We have associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics, A.B. Stoddard, and CNN counterterrorism analyst and former CIA counterterrorism official Philip Mudd. It's good to have all of you here on this important morning. Phil Mudd, the word unmasking is being used in a very nefarious way now. It's almost like you should say it in an evil whisper. They were unmasking. What is unmasking, and when is it right and when is it not?
Well, let me take you into this situation. Going back to the fall, as you know, there's a lot of stories swirling in Washington, including at the White House, about Russian interference in the election. Obviously, the president appropriately asks his national security advisor, Susan Rice, to look into how the government should respond. On January 2nd, President Obama announces sanctions against the Russian and expels Russian diplomats. I've got to judge, based on what we've seen in the past 24, 48 hours, that Susan Rice is getting intelligence not only about how the Russians are responding to those sanctions, but about communications between the Russians and Trump officials. So let's cut to the chase. What is she supposed to do? She's responsible for implementing the sanctions policy of President Obama, and she sees intelligence that says person number one, American number one, is talking to Russian officials about this issue. She either says, I have the responsibility to know who's talking to the Russians about the president's policy, or I'm not going to know. She goes forward and says, I'm going to unmask those names. Not only appropriate, but it's her responsibility to know this. This is a smokescreen by the White House. By the way, Sean Spicer knows about as much about intelligence as I know about ballet. This is dime a dozen what the National Security Advisor should be doing. She's got to know how people are trying to impede the President of the United States from implementing sanctions, and she's got to know who's talking to the Russians. It's that simple, Chris.
Okay, so A.B., that is quite different than how the White House is depicting this situation and how right-wing media is depicting this situation. Let's listen to Bill O'Reilly, who last night addressed the angle the White House likes.
This story is starting to explode, trying to dwarf the Russian thing, because the Russian thing's been going on for a while, and there's no evidence. Everybody says there's no evidence. Even Schiff, the Democrat ranking on the House Intel Committee, says there's no Russian thing that we've seen. But the Susan
well,
Rice
he didn't quite say that, but he came close. This means we're going to have dual track investigations in both houses at a minimum, and that this whole question of the gathering of intelligence, surveillance, and unmasking of American names is going to be a significant part of it. And I think
it's now broken out.
There's no way to turn back from that now.
Plenty of way to turn back from it. It's by keeping the facts straight of how you have general issues versus you have specific ones of concern here, A.B. Stoddard, about how this was done. Do you see this being reported on legitimately in that clip and others that are coming out of the conservative media?
Well, I do think that the leaking is the issue, and the leaking is a problem no matter who the administration is, which party controls it. The Intelligence Committee has a code of conduct, and they're not supposed to be leaking that stuff. And the wide dissemination of these, leaks of transcripts and stuff is really the problem here. But what people are doing, as we've been talking about, is sort of conflating and confusing all these issues. And people at home who are interested in the truth really need to learn the difference between incidental collection and wiretapping. They are not the same thing. Unmasking is not wiretapping. Unmasking is not leaking. And so it allows Trump supporters and allies to build this narrative that there was this wild surveillance of Trump and his associates. There were conversations between FISA targets and other people, perhaps other foreigners or even Trump associates themselves, during which names of Trump campaign officials, etc., family members were caught up in this. It's the wide dissemination that is a problem, but potentially a crime. Susan Rice has a credibility problem. Devin Nunes has a credibility problem. So this is very muddied waters here at this point, but it's important for people to know that what Jim points out in his reporting, that this is not only legal, whether people like it or not, but it's not even unusual, is really, that's the fundamental headline here and the bottom line.
So then, Jim, take it one step further for us, what A.B. just raised. Do we know how widely Susan Rice then disseminated the name that she asked to be unmasked or revealed to her?
We don't know that. I mean, this is the thing. It was described to me again by very senior officials. When unmasking happens, it's not like you put out a memo, right, to the entire White House staff. That unmasking happens between the briefer and that senior national security official. Now, is it possible that senior national security official then goes down the corridor and tells someone else in the building or calls a reporter? It's certainly possible. We don't know that at this stage. But the other point I would make is this, is that unmasking cannot one person cannot order unmasking. It requires the intelligence community, in this case the NSA, to agree that that request is material and then to grant that request. And the other point that was made to me was that these things are meticulously logged. One former senior intelligence official said to me, and Chris, you'll appreciate this, they are logged like Irish baptismal records. So you can't do it. You can't do it in the dark, and that's one reason why Devin Nunes was able to go to the White House and look at the request that Susan Rice made. They are meticulously logged, and that's by protocol. That's by law.
And, look, again, you guys are all making great points, and a lot of them are going to bear repeating because we are seeing an intentional deception going on here, Phil Mudd, where you want to take a general issue, which people do have about surveillance. What are you guys collecting there in the spy world, and when is my name up for your own offer within your agency or outside, and what was done specifically here? And to Jim's point, if Rice wanted to leak this, if they wanted to do something sneaky, why would she have gone through the normal challenge of having it unmasked and created a paper trail of her own deception?
Sure, and if you look at this case, let me pick up on what Jim said and take you inside the room. I have been in the room when the FBI director requests the unmasking of a name. Believe it or not, the FBI director can't just determine the name in that intercepted communication. The director of the FBI has to go through that formal process that Jim just identified. So as soon as Susan Rice, presuming this story is correct, asks for that name, she knows that she's going to be entered in a registry that indicates she's made the request. One more point. There was a suggestion earlier that this is an intel community leak. I'm going to wager you, Chris, I'll bet you a beer, that some of these leaks are coming from within the White House. That is, there are White House officials who are seeing these records and saying, I want to throw Susan Rice under the bus because that diverts this investigation from Russia. I don't think this is all intel, guys. And we know that because one of the connections we see between the White House and outside was the White House inappropriately calling the Congress.
Well, look, me buying you things to eat and drink is going to be nothing new. I don't even know if it counts as a wager. But all you have to do is look at Devin Nunes. He went from saying, oh, no, I got all this independently, to having a direct connection to the White House with the information he wound up putting out. So there's something to what Mudd is saying.
It is a tangled web. Thank you, panel, for helping us sort it out this morning. We have other news to tell you about. Turning to the Supreme Court battle on Capitol Hill, Democrats now have the votes to block President Trump's nominee, Neil Gorsuch. So Republicans are poised to override them by changing Senate rules to confirm him when they vote on Friday. That would be unprecedented at this level. CNN's Sunlan Sarfati is live on Capitol Hill with more on this showdown. What is next, Sunlan?
Good morning, Allison. Well, it is notable that Democrats have now locked in enough support to be able to successfully filibuster Neil Gorsuch, which essentially dares the Republicans to do what they've been threatening to do all along, invoke this so-called nuclear option, changing long-standing Senate rules, getting Gorsuch through this week with a simple majority vote. And so far, Republicans are not backing down from that threat.
Judge Gorsuch will be confirmed by the end of the week by the United States Senate.
Senate Republicans poised to invoke the nuclear option for Supreme Court nominees to confirm Neil Gorsuch.
I'm going to vote to change the rules because I'm not going to be part of a Senate where Democrats get their judges and a Republican can never get theirs.
After Democrats secured enough votes to filibuster his nomination.
This nomination is not the usual nomination.
The Senate Majority Leader vowing to change the rules so that Gorsuch and future Supreme Court nominees will only need a simple majority to secure confirmation, meaning 51 votes rather than 60.
I think that's unworthy of the Senate. I don't think it's the right thing to do.
The judges are going to become more ideological because you don't have to reach across the aisle to get one vote any longer. So this is going to haunt the Senate. It's going to change the judiciary, and it's so unnecessary.
But Democrats have been emboldened after Republicans refused to hold a hearing last year for President Obama's Supreme Court Justice pick, Merrick Garland.
If 7 months of preventing Judge Merrick Garland from getting a hearing and a vote is anything, it is the longest and most successful partisan filibuster in Senate history.
The Supreme Court showdown playing out on Capitol Hill as the White House tries to revive the health care battle. Vice President Mike Pence meeting with the House Freedom Caucus late last night, hoping to win them over with two new offers. First, allowing states to opt out of providing essential health benefits required under Obamacare. Also on the table, a waiver for insurers to opt out of requirements that ban them from charging higher premiums based on gender, age, or prior illness.
We're encouraged by at least the idea, intrigued by the idea, but would certainly need a whole lot more information before we can take any action.
Meantime, back on the Gorsuch battle, the wheels in motion will start turning on all of this today. At some point, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will move to end debate today. That will set up a key procedural vote on Thursday. We expect, as we've been reporting, that filibuster will not be defeated. It is then when this potential nuclear option could be invoked, which, Chris, potentially sets up a final confirmation vote for Neil Gorsuch on Friday.
Politically sticky situation.
Our CNN political analyst and New York Times deputy culture editor Patrick Healy and CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Jeffrey Toobin. Great to see all of you. Jeffrey, let me start with you. We call this the nuclear option.
We do.
It would be unprecedented at the Supreme Court level. What does this mean for what's going to happen this week?
Well, it means that Neil Gorsuch is going to get confirmed because there are 53 solid votes for him, and that's clearly a majority, and the rules will change so that there is no longer a need for 60 votes to close off debate, but instead it's just a simple majority.
So forevermore, what happens this week will change the rules of how Supreme Court nominees...
Until they change it again. You know,
Yeah,
it's a procedural rule. They could,
but
on who wants what, you know?
The ratchet seems only to work this way. And I have to say, I find this less outrageous, less crazy than most people. I mean, the Senate is an undemocratic institution to start with. You have very small states with the same number of votes as very large states. And 40 senators can stop legislation, can stop a nomination. Why is that such a good thing? Why shouldn't democracy rule? I don't get.
Well, it was
why
always
this is
seen
such a
that
travesty.
it was always seen as empowering a minority. Right. You're going to be out of power at some point, but there is something that needs to be made plain, and that is one of the things. That's a good point, Jeffrey. But the Democrats have enough votes to stop it. No, they don't. Right. They don't have enough votes to stop Gorsuch because you only need 51 votes.
Sure.
This is a filibuster move. This is a move to stop voting from happening.
Right.
So this in and of itself is a minority power play.
You need 60 until
You
this
never
week.
needed 60. What it is you need 60 to shut me up, which is if I want to...
Where do I get
Well, really, you only need your vote in one elbow. But if the Democrats don't want a vote to happen, they do something called a filibuster, which either party can do.
Right,
and they keep talking. It's 60 votes is to stop the filibuster, and then they can vote, and it's a straight up and down vote.
I think he's trying to prove the point. I mean,
he's trying to make it clear. It's big words.
No, I mean, to Jeffrey's point, it's about can the genie ever be put back in the bottle? I mean, once they sort of uncork this, once it's once everything is about just 50 plus 1, the history of the Senate has been about slowing things down, not looking necessarily for a straight line majority, but trying to build up some kind of consensus, trying to get some kind of bipartisan support. That is a thing really of the past. I mean, right now it's all about sort of partisan politics, what president's party is in office, and the degree to which all the members are going to fall in line.
But AB, let's be clear. I mean, Republicans say, hey, Harry Reid started it.
Well, Harry Reid in 2013 got rid of the filibuster for lower court nominations, and what will happen by doing this for the Supreme Court nominations is it will, many fear, lead to it going away for legislation as well. So I understand Jeffrey Tubin doesn't have a problem with that. Legislation will just pass now with 51 votes. But in this atmosphere that's so polarized, I don't think we need less bipartisanship. So I also think it's going to be really a corrosive move on both bodies, but both branches, not only on the Senate and therefore the Congress, but on the Supreme Court, where you're going to see more kind of polarizing partisan figures. Because if everyone's confirmable, then no one is really held to the standards with which these justices have always been confirmed, which is that they're, uniquely qualified and come with sterling credentials to the job that neither party in the past has objected to, even when there was a disagreement over ideology. So I think that's why so many of us are sort of lamenting that this is going to happen, because it's going to affect not only the Congress but the Supreme Court as well.
Supreme Court is so important. The man or woman will be there so long that it shouldn't just be who you like in a moment of advantage. What do you make of that argument?
I don't buy it. I mean, first of all, I think the presidents have taken these nominations very seriously for a long time. Neil Gorsuch, whatever else you think of him, is very qualified on paper. He's very conservative. But this is what Donald Trump promised. Donald Trump promised, I'm going to appoint a pro-life justice to the Supreme Court. That is apparently what he has done. I think he's going to continue to do that, whether it's 50 or 60 that are required for confirmation. And I think Hillary Clinton would have done the same thing if she was president.
What's sharp is to remember, Antonin Scalia was confirmed 98-0. These are different times now, and the idea of sort of saying, well, we're going to, sort of hold on to these kind of old rules to try to take us back to some sort of better day. Neither party wants that. The Democrats did this to George W. Bush. Republicans fought, Barack Obama on this. It's not where we are now in politics.
Let's talk about something that also interests and affects so many Americans, and that's health care. AB, the House Freedom Caucus is back at it. The White House says they're back at it. Democrats have their own ideas. Where are we with health care plan right now?
Well, the president went from threatening to support primary challenges against the members of the Freedom Caucus who brought the bill down on March 24th, but by Monday he was talking to them, and which is an interesting thing. Although he talked about it working with Democrats, also threatened Democrats in that Friday tweet, it doesn't seem that he's going to get any takers. So he realized he really has to deal with the hardline conservatives who were the toughest votes to get last time. They are back to debating on the very same things, the Title I regulations under Obamacare that make it so popular. It will be hard actually to find something that the Freedom Caucus can support that lowers premiums for healthy people and will likely raise premiums for sick people that the moderate Republicans will agree to. There are still skeptics at the leadership table about this, though everyone wishes something would just fall from the sky and work out. There's a lot of doubt going on.
Hey, quickly, AB, you heard anything about drug pricing? This as new accusers are coming forward against Fox News host Bill O'Reilly. The New York Times reports that the network and O'Reilly have paid out $13 million to 5 women. Now, 2 companies have pulled advertisements from his show as of last night. Now, O'Reilly did not address the allegations on his show last night, but said in a statement that he is vulnerable to lawsuits because of his status. One of his new accusers, who has not filed a lawsuit and says she is not seeking any money, spoke to CNN's Don Lemon last night about O'Reilly. Here's a piece.
I was asked to be on his show as a regular guest, and 3 weeks into it, I got kind of an exciting email from his secretary saying, Mr. O'Reilly's coming out to Los Angeles and he'd like to have dinner with you. I said, absolutely, because I wanted to talk to him about my career prospects. He brought it up at the beginning of the dinner, basically said Roger Ailes is a good friend of his and they plan on making me a contributor. At the end of the dinner, he simply said, let's get out of here. And there was this awkward moment where we couldn't find each other, and then he caught up with me and said, no, come back to my suite. And I simply said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he said, what, you think I'm going to attack you? And so anyway, at that point he became hostile, and then he spent some time weaning me off the show. I did what...
All right, joining us now is one of the reporters behind that New York Times investigation, Emily Steele, along with contributing editor for Vanity Fair and author of War at the Wall Street Journal, Sarah Ellison. It's good to have you both here. Let me start with you, Emily. In terms of the reporting, how confident are you? What do you think you're dealing with in terms of scale and scope, in terms of what we know about Fox News culture?
We're very confident in the reporting, which is why we were able to go forward with this story and put it on the front page of the New York Times. And what we found is that there were 5 settlements with women who had made allegations that Bill O'Reilly had sexually harassed them or otherwise treated them inappropriately. One of the interesting things is 2 of those deals, 2 of those settlements were struck in the months since Roger Ailes had left the network, and another one Fox did not know about until late 2016. It was a secret deal that Bill O'Reilly had struck in 2011.
Please, jump in whenever, because you guys know much more about this than I do. But when I learned that in your reporting about the timing, it suggested to me more of a window into culture, right? Because there is somewhat of a temptation to put it all on Ailes. This began and ended with him, and now Fox News is clean and pure because he is no longer there. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, that was certainly the storyline that Fox wanted everyone to come out of the summer with, is that they had launched an investigation. It was with a real law firm. They had gotten to the bottom of this. Ailes, it was stunning that he had left the company that he founded. And James and Lachlan Murdoch were there and saying, we want this to be a transparent, open, safe culture for women. Everything's fine. Everyone's moving on. We obviously see that this is a kind of a problem in a workplace that is much harder to eradicate. And while they were saying all those things and while they were putting out those statements and making those sorts of grand pronouncements about the future, they knew that these settlements were there with Bill O'Reilly and they weren't announcing them. And this is a business. They have a business to run and they don't want to sacrifice their biggest star who pulls in $500 million a year over 2 years. He's worth a lot to the company. And so it really makes you look at that investigation this summer a little differently. As was that an effort to kind of whitewash some of the problems, or was it sort of an effort to just have a great public relations moment, or were they really serious about getting to the bottom of the problem?
And what we know too is that it's not just Roger Ailes or Bill O'Reilly who've had accusations made against them. There was a woman named Tamara Holder who Fox News struck a settlement worth more than $2.5 million with. And she had made allegations that a man had sexually assaulted her, a Fox News executive, in the company headquarters.
Now, one of the things that you have to deal with in reporting this, and frankly dealing with it legally, is what is real and what is opportunistic, where once you know an organization is vulnerable, and I think by any estimation you'd have to qualify Fox News as vulnerable on this issue. Now I can come forward, or much more likely, a female can come forward and say something happened, and they're going to settle because they're worried about the exposure. Do you believe there is any real risk at that, or that is a factor at all in what we're seeing there?
Well, that's certainly what Bill O'Reilly said, that he is a target and because of his prominence. And the other thing that you hear is that sometimes companies do settle these allegations, not necessarily because there is merit, because they don't want the bad headlines, they don't want the cost of going to trial.
I mean, I think that there are 2 things. One is that the Ailes scenario was one where we heard very similar stories from lots of different women. And so that, Julie Roginski, her suit really looked quite similar to some of the other women. That's something that I'm pretty confident that the claims in that suit have some backup evidence for what those are. Of course, Ailes and O'Reilly have denied these claims very, very vehemently. There can be some opportunism, but I think you look at a company like this, it's very hard not to see with this number of women that are coming forward. This is not a fun thing for women to do. I don't think that people who are coming forward come out of it with a badge of honor or feel like they're particularly more employable than they were before they made the claims. So I think
proof of purpose, you can track it. You can
Right.
look at women who have made these claims that became high profile, and you see what has happened to their career lights after that.
What's interesting is the 5 women who received settlements after making accusations against Bill O'Reilly haven't worked in TV news again.
And in terms of culture change, I think that's the point.
Right.
What do you think in a situation like Fox News will make a difference?
Well, I think it takes a long time, in fact. You know, Bill O'Reilly is still there. He helped
It just redid his contract.
He had just renewed his contract. Roger Ailes basically founded the network with Rupert Murdoch, and Bill O'Reilly was their first big star, and it has remained so. He is the biggest star that they have today. I think that, you know, while you have all of the other people who are still there, you have all of the kind of executives who supported Ailes and were there along the way. There's an apparatus that supported him. Now they were following his orders, and everyone pinned everything on Ailes. But I think if you're a woman in that environment, or a man in that environment, or anyone in that culture, you look around and you wonder what really has changed. Now they brought in a new human resources person who put out a statement yesterday, and they said, here are all the numbers that you can call. I think it's very intimidating to actually make those calls, and I think it just takes a long time. I don't think that there's necessarily ill intent all over the organization, but they haven't taken some of the steps clearly to make people feel like it's a safe place to work.
And the timing that they brought up about that Emily brought up about these latest settlements coming after Roger Ailes is going to add some smoke to the situation. But Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank
you. And Emily, I appreciate it. We look forward to the reporting always. Thanks to you, our international viewers, for watching us. For you, CNN Newsroom is next. But for our U.S. viewers, we have a lot of news. What do you say? Let's get after it.
If somebody inappropriately unmasked an American name, we want to know that.
President Trump wants you to believe he is the victim of a crooked scheme.
We have no reason to believe that anything illegal was done here.
If you're going to block Judge Gorsuch, then you're going to block anyone that a Republican president would nominate.
This isn't about finding a consensus nominee. This is about 40 more years of decisions.
Judge Gorsuch will be confirmed.
This is a 36-year-old guy who has no actual knowledge about any policy areas.
There's a lot of areas that he has been working very diligently on behalf of the government.
We haven't seen a lot of regular order in this administration when it comes to making foreign policy.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning. Welcome to your new day. President Trump trying to deflect again from the expanding web of ties between his team and Russia. The president alleging former National Security Advisor Susan Rice improperly unmasked the identity of Trump associates who were caught up in surveillance of foreign targets.
The president wants us to believe he's the victim of, quote, a crooked scheme, but there is no evidence of any wrongdoing. In fact, national security experts say that a national security advisor requesting that an identity be unmasked was a reflection of how much traffic there was involving Trump people and Russians. A very busy day. 75 of the Trump presidency. We have it all covered. Let's begin with CNN's Jim Sciutto live in Washington. Jim, give us all of your latest reporting.
Well, Allison, good morning. The only public comment coming from Rice so far is an aide speaking to us here at CNN, calling the allegation that Rice improperly unmasked the names of Americans false. But set that aside for a moment. I've spoken to senior intelligence officials, former officials from both Democratic and Republican administrations, who say a couple of things. One, unmasking is not unusual. It is done by senior national security officials to get more information about the intelligence they see. It is not illegal. There were protocols put in place after 9/11, processes for doing exactly this, but also most importantly, it's not public. It is not leaking. That information is shared just between the intelligence briefer and that national security official who asks for that information. This latest publicizing of this effort here and the issues around unmasking appear to be the latest effort to justify the president's unproven allegation that President Obama surveilled him during the campaign.
Former President Obama's national security advisor Susan Rice at the center of President Trump's latest attempt to renew his unproven wiretapping claim and divert attention away from his team's contacts with Russia. President Trump seizing on conservative media reports that claimed that Ambassador Rice unmasked the names of Trump transition officials caught up in surveillance.
At its core is this was surveillance for apparently political reasons.
Tweeting that he was spied on before the nomination and calling it a crooked scheme. A source close to Rice telling CNN that the allegations that she did anything unusual or improper, false. The White House, meanwhile, blasting the media for ignoring the ginned-up scandal.
From a media standpoint, somewhat intrigued by the lack of interest that we've seen in some of these public revelations.
As officials stress that unmasking names in intelligence reports is a routine procedure, something different from leaking this information to the press.
If somebody feels that there's intelligence value, and of course there's a whole series of procedures that you have to go through and lawyers look over your shoulder, so there's nothing at all unusual about unmasking.
The administration's latest justification, a far cry from President Trump's initial claim 1 month ago that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. An accusation that Mr. Trump has since attempted to redefine.
That really covers surveillance and many other things.
And justify, even after his own FBI director refuted the claim.
I think you're going to find some very interesting items coming to the forefront over the next 2 weeks.
Last week, the Trump administration tried to distort comments made by a former Obama defense official, Evelyn Farkas.
Dr. Farkas's admissions alone are devastating.
To substantiate Trump's contention that Obama spied on him. Farkas says her comments were, quote, wildly misinterpreted. And the week before that, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes got wrapped up in the White House's diversion.
The president needs to know that these intelligence reports are out there.
Briefing the commander-in-chief and the media before his own committee about classified information of incidental collection on the president's associates.
I very much appreciated the fact that they found what they found.
Trump calling Nunes' announcement vindication. Days later, it turns out that officials inside Trump's White House were the source of the documents shown to Nunes.
We believe that this is nothing more than just an effort to roll more smoke bombs into an investigation that was making progress.
Now, there are legitimate questions about the protocols for unmasking names. Those are open questions asked by both parties. There's also a question as to whether that unmasked information, after it was shared with a senior national security official, was then shared with other officials or possibly leaked. But based on what we know now, the information out there now, Chris and Allison, we don't know that. And then unmasking by itself, certainly not a crime and also certainly not unusual.
But sure is being used as fuel for suspicion. That's for sure.
That is really useful information, Jim. Please stay with us. We want to bring in the rest of our panel to discuss all of this. We have reporter and editor-at-large for CNN Politics, Chris Cillizza, and CNN counterterrorism analyst and former CIA counterterrorism official Philip Mudd. Phil, President Trump has every reason to try to change the subject from whatever connections his campaign team was having with Russians. Some say today what we're seeing, this is an effort to do this. So explain to us if what Susan Rice did, if it is proven that she had these names unmasked, why that is business as usual.
Sure, and let's be clear, you say the president has every reason to divert the conversation. White Houses, since the beginning of time, have the appropriate responsibility in some ways to spin the news in the direction they want to spin it. This is purposefully misleading the American people. That's different than spin. Let's take this and put it in context. Going back to the fall, everybody in America knows that we had questions, including questions coming from the White House, about inappropriate Russian intervention in the American election, stealing emails, for example, from both sides of the aisle. Then going into January, President Obama at that point on January 2nd sanctions the Russians for this activity. Now, what are you doing if you're Susan Rice at this point? You're reading information, including intercepts, about how the Russians are responding to these sanctions. And I'm going to guess in this situation, you're seeing information in those intercepts that indicate the Russians are talking to American person number one, American person number two. And as the national security advisor, you got to be saying, I need to know who these Americans are who are interfering with the president's right to sanction the Russians. So she says, this is where unmasking comes in, I need to know who these Americans are. Let me flip this. If she had said, I don't have an interest in knowing which Americans are interfering, I think that would have been dereliction of duty. But let's be clear. This is not spin from the White House. This is misleading the American people on something that is common practice in the intelligence business, Allison.
I mean, look, Mr. Solicitor, what we keep seeing is the White House avoiding the discussion of Russian interference. It has become synonymous in their minds with they did something wrong. And that does a disservice to truth here, because we need to know what happened with this hacking, who knew, who might have helped, and how to avoid it going forward. And to that point, the White House wants to talk about this unmasking and play on the ignorance of that process. They do not want to talk on yet another weird meeting between someone connected to Trump and someone connected to Russia. This one happening in the Seychelles with the founder of Blackwater, who just happens to be the brother of Betsy DeVos, who's now the education secretary. His name is Eric Prince. Well, he's not in the administration. Why do we care? That is an improper suggestion. He's close to Bannon. He has been known and connected to advising efforts for President Trump in Trump Tower, down in Washington, D.C. He's a relevant person. What do you make of this meeting?
Yeah, I'll add, gave $250,000 to a Donald Trump super PAC. You know, I mean, that's not a small amount of money. What I make of it is that where there's smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke, you should investigate whether there's fire. I'm not saying there is fire, but Donald Trump's best course here, this has been true since the beginning, is to say, you know what? I didn't do anything wrong, which is what he says publicly. And then he should say, and that's why we should have a full-scale investigation into this. Let Congress look into it as much as possible. The problem here, and Phil and Jim make this point really importantly, is basically what they are doing here is saying, oh, unmasking over here. See, they were. It's an allegation in search of evidence, and that's what it has been from the start, Chris. He made a tweet on a Saturday morning based on something he read in Breitbart. That is a fact. The FBI, the CIA, Devin Nunes, everyone who looks at this stuff says there is zero evidence that Trump Tower was wiretapped. They're ordered by the president, although he couldn't even really do that. But that allegation, that is separate from what we're talking about here. And I think the goal is to try to just conflate it, put it all in a mix, muddy the waters, and say, well, at the end of the day, I was sort of right, which is what Trump is saying. And it's just not, that on the facts, on the merits, that's not right.
Hey, Jim, back to Susan Rice for a second. And this is one of the things that's raising eyebrows about her from the White House as well as right-wing media. She was asked about this and about the unmasking on PBS something like 10 days ago. I might have that date wrong. And she said something to the effect of, I don't know anything about that. Could she have said at that time, yes, I was quite concerned about some masked names that I saw, and I asked to know the identities?
Absolutely. I mean, she could have. I mean, she could have explained at that point that that's part of the job. It happens. Not just her, but other senior national security officials, and not just related to Trump, and not just related to Russia, but related to a whole host of intelligence reports that these officials see every day. She didn't do that. Certainly a lost opportunity.
But well, I mean, do we know why? Has she explained, or her
did she lie?
Explained why?
The fact is, I don't know. I do know this because I asked that question of people close to her yesterday, and they said that from her perspective, she doesn't know what specific unmasking Devin Nunes, Trump, and others are talking about, in part because that is something that she asks, she says, or asked during the regular course of her work as the National Security Advisor. She asked to unmask names, in multiple intelligence reports, some related to Russia and some not. And be clear, you remember Devin Nunes, when he first came out with this, didn't say specifically that it was Russia. It was others as well. And I noted this earlier in the broadcast, that when you do ask these questions, they are meticulously logged by law. You know, you can't do it in secret. There's a paper trail of it. So we don't know what the explanation is for her comment there. But I do know from speaking to people yesterday close to her that she doesn't know specifically what Devin Nunes and others are accusing her of when it comes to unmasking, because that's something she did during the regular course of her job.
But Phil, to what you call purposeful deception here, even if you assume Susan Rice was lying, she's being shady, she didn't want people to know what's going on, fine, let's assume that. But Phil Mudd, she wasn't shady enough to cover her tracks in trying to get these names unmasked in the first place. She went through the paperwork. So she wound up creating a paper trail that wound up unearthing her own deception. That doesn't make any sense either.
It doesn't make sense to me. And one of the directions I'm looking at is who decided to release her name and all these accusations about leaks. My guess is that was not the intelligence community. That's somebody who wanted to divert attention away from the Russia conversation. But let me pick up for just a moment to ensure we understand the formality of this process that Jim was just talking about. When you're in the room and an intelligence briefer gives you a document, a top secret document that says, for example, a Russian official, a Russian diplomat was talking to U.S. person number 1. That's how it reads. And you say, in the case that I'm familiar with, you're the FBI director, I need to know who U.S. person number 1 is because I need to know who's communicating inappropriately maybe with a Russian diplomat. That goes into a formal process. The briefer doesn't just say, well, that's John Doe. You've got to go back and make a formal request. Your name is logged. So when she made those requests, she had to know that this is going to appear in logs until the end of time, that her name was at that point potentially searchable. So to suggest that there was some sort of underhanded process here is not appropriate. She did what a lot of intel guys do.
Panel, thank you. There's so much to get our minds around, and you have really helped us this morning. Thanks, guys.
And these days, it seems like, you have to pay attention to what's not being talked about because there's so much distraction going on. Here's a point in that way. The Trump White House is going after former President Obama's law enforcement agency. Why? Attorney General Jeff Sessions is ordering the Justice Department to review police reforms that were put in place in the past 8 years. CNN senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns live at the White House with more. This was an eyebrow popper, go through this difficult process of finding admissions of fault, finding things that can be changed, and now they want to undo those or question them or second guess them. Why?
Well, Chris, it's important because it's, number one, a signal and perhaps a sign that the Justice Department under President Trump, as well as Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, is looking to reverse course or at least change direction on the issue of policing police departments around the country. The Attorney General putting out a memo essentially telling the Justice Department that it wants a comprehensive review of, among other things, the consent decrees that the Justice Department has entered into with a number of cities around the country, including Baltimore most recently, which had so much unrest due to allegations of police use of excessive force. So the Justice Department now saying they want a comprehensive review of the reform activities. We actually have part of that memo for you in a graphic. It says, misdeeds of individual bad actors should not impugn or undermine the legitimate and honorable work that law enforcement officers or agencies perform in keeping America's communities safe. So this is a campaign.
This suggestion that former Obama National Security Advisor Susan Rice improperly unmasked the identity of Trump associates is part of what our president calls a crooked scheme. An associate of Rice says it's just plain false. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Jim Himes. He serves on the House Intel Committee, something that has also been accused of being a crooked scheme because of what happened with Devin Nunes. You met last night. Are you guys getting back to work? Can you get back to work in earnest?
Yeah, I think so, Chris. We did, after a week of canceled meetings and back and forth over this whole issue, we did meet yesterday, and I'm happy to say it looks like we're underway. We have been promised access, and of course the lead Democrat, Adam Schiff, has gotten access to the material, which sent Chairman Nunes off on his, I guess escapade would be the right word. And so I do think we're getting back to business, which is really important here, both for the investigation but also for the oversight role that we have to play.
All right, so answer this criticism then. You can't be taken seriously with anything that comes out of that committee because you have Nunes, who went around the committee, who at worst lied, at best was confusing about where he got that information from, and it seemed to be a naked attempt to front-run a favorable narrative to the White House. Why should anybody believe anything that comes out of that committee?
Well, for starters, we will be there. The minority opposition is in the room, and we will not be there if we are denied access to witnesses, if we're denied access to particular lines of inquiry. And look, I understand that there's always going to be a little bit of a question around the chairman's motivations. I mean, this isn't the first time, you know, his objectivity has been called into question. You'll recall a couple of weeks ago when it turned out that he and the chairman over on the Senate side were knocking down a New York Times news story. So I understand that that shadow exists, but look, we are going to stay in this investigation because we don't have an outside commission, because other than the FBI and the Senate, we're the only game in town, but we will walk out if there is at some point an effort to keep us from seeing information we might need to do a good report.
The fear is that you have people using it as a propaganda arm of the White House. And we see the next piece of evidence, the next brick in this wall of what Phil Mudd, you know, a very esteemed CIA guy, calls purposeful deception with this unmasking scandal. You know, suggesting that unmasking is leaking when it isn't. Suggesting that Susan Rice was undertaking this crooked scheme of surveillance of the Trump folk, which is demonstrably untrue. If that's what's going to be coming out, and it's going to be backed up by someone like Nunes, how is that oversight?
Well, I guess I'd observe that a Republican could do all that. Certainly, a Republican who is interested in joining this effort to cloud the waters on, first of all, the existence of an FBI investigation to Trump administration links and possible collusion with the Russians, but also interested in sort of backing up this absurd tweet about surveillance of Trump Tower. You could do that, investigation or no investigation. What's more concerning to me, Chris, is that, you know, when you have a president who relies on falsehoods and lies, the biggest inauguration ever, 3 million fraudulent votes, my health care bill is going to cover more people, be cheaper, and be terrific, beautiful, and wonderful. When your castle is constructed on utter falsehood, one of the things you have to do over time is you have to take all of the power out of the truth. You need to suggest that maybe Susan Rice's activities, which everybody is saying were, if they occurred, were perfectly proper for a national security advisor, you have to sort of say, oh, well, that's the other side of the story. That all of this is just Republicans fighting Democrats one more time. Forget about the fact that the FBI is investigating this administration. Forget about the fact that the president openly promotes falsehoods, because this is just another darn Democratic versus Republican fight. That's a huge win for a White House which wants to both distract the attention of the American people, but also for whom doing away with an absolute sense of truth with any power to it is really important.
So did this meeting in the Seychelles between Eric Prince, who has numerous connections, financial, familial, and otherwise, to the Trump administration, with a Putin advisor, did that get any attention by your committee in your last meeting?
Well, you know, it only broke yesterday, so it's sort of on the list of possibly odd-looking meetings between people associated with this administration and the Russians. And so, yes, of course we'll look into that. But let me step back here and just in the interests of truth, let me say something that the other side has not been willing to say about the Susan Rice thing. There's not necessarily anything improper about a meeting between Eric Prince and a Russian official in the Seychelles. There's not necessarily anything improper about Jeff Sessions talking to the Attorney General. This is what an investigation is for. An investigation is to determine whether there was something improper here. But as one of your previous correspondents said, if the best way to get to the answer about whether there was anything improper is for the White House to do the exact opposite of what they have been doing for the last couple of months, which is to say, guys, let's move on. There's nothing here. And in order to show you that there's nothing here, I'm not going to criticize the investigation as a witch hunt. I'm going to do everything I can to help it, because the investigation will clear me and my people. Of course, the White House has acted in exactly the opposite fashion of a White House which knows that there was no wrongdoing and which wants to move on.
And Congressman, you know that I'm on you about this, about the integrity of the investigation, not because of you necessarily, but because of the answers themselves being so important to what happened with Russian interference, who knew, and how we avoid it going forward. So you know you always have a forum here to discuss what you think the public needs to know about that investigation. Thanks for being
absolutely. And look, this is why we always wanted an outside commission, so that you couldn't level these charges of partisanship. But we didn't get that, so again, we're kind of one of the few games in town.
Jim, chemical attack. CNN's Barbara Starr live at the Pentagon with the breaking details. The pictures that we are seeing this morning are harrowing and really point to the worst of intentions.
Good morning. These pictures horrifying indeed as they emerge from Idlib in northern Syria. Now, this is an area where regime and rebel forces have fought for years. We don't know who is responsible for this yet, but what we do know is the Assad regime for years has dropped barrel bombs on its own people in this area, often filled with chlorine gas, a weapon of terror that can cause the kinds of respiratory symptoms and distress that you see in some of these pictures emerging from the area. So we don't know who, but we do know who has done it before. This comes a couple of days, of course, after the Trump administration gave the world a signal that it will no longer try and push Bashar al-Assad from power. The question being raised now, is this paving the way for the Assad regime to act with impunity even more than it already has? Very serious matter, because when the U.S. says it's not going to push Assad from power, it basically steps aside and perhaps, in the view of some, gives him the ability to carry out these kinds of attacks. It is something that is going to be very difficult for U.S. forces. They train other militaries around the world in human rights, and if the U.S. doesn't step up on this human rights question, it's hard to see what may come next, what kinds of attacks may come next. Allison?
Barbara, thank you for spelling it all out for us this morning. Joining us now is Senator John McCain of Arizona. He is the chair of the Armed Services Committee. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Allison.
What should the U.S. response be to this apparent chemical or gas attack on the Syrian people, where we know at this hour 11 children have been killed under the age of 8?
You know, we've seen this movie before. It was when Barack Obama said that they would have a red line, they crossed it, and he did nothing. And Bashar Assad and his friends, his friends the Russians, take note of what Americans say. I'm sure they took note of what our Secretary of State said just the other day, that the Syrian people would be determining their own future themselves. That one of the more incredible statements I've ever heard, given the involvement of Hezbollah, of the Iranians, of the Russians, and of course the barrel bombing and precision strikes by Russian aircraft into hospitals in Aleppo. So I'm sure they're encouraged to know that the United States is withdrawing and seeking some kind of new arrangement with the Russians, and it is another disgraceful chapter in American history, and it was predictable.
So, Senator, what do you want to see President Trump do?
I want him to hear him say, we're going to arm the Free Syrian Army. We are going to dedicate ourselves to the removal of Bashar Assad. We're going to have the Russians pay a price for their engagement. The Iranians and Hezbollah are also heavily involved. All players here are going to have to pay a penalty, and the United States of America is going to be on the side of people who fight for freedom, and we will not sit by and watch chemical weapons being used to slaughter innocent women and children. You might remember when the pictures were smuggled out before by a wonderful man named Cesar of those who were victims of chemical attacks. Didn't we learn a lesson when Barack Obama refused to do anything?
Senator, that is completely different than what the administration is saying. I mean, you just paraphrased what Secretary of State Tillerson said about the long-term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people. And then UN Ambassador Nikki Haley went further, some say. She said, quote, our priority is no longer to sit and focus on getting Assad out.
Well, the United States of America is known to help people who want to freedom and democracy. No, none of us are arguing for American troops on the ground there to fight against Bashar Assad, but we certainly believe that we can fight ISIS and we can help people who are struggling against this incredibly, one of the great brutal dictators in history, Bashar Assad and his minions. There was a front page story in the Washington Post yesterday about the torture of thousands and thousands and murder of thousands and thousands in Damascus. I mean, these are war crimes on the scale that almost unmatched since Nazi Germany or Pol Pot.
So why isn't the Trump administration saying any of that?
You're asking the wrong guy.
I mean, what do you see as the Trump doctrine for how to deal with these issues internationally?
I don't see any doctrine right now. I do have great confidence in the national security team around the president, Mattis and Kelly, and our new director of national intelligence, Dan Coates and McMaster, and I hope that they will develop a strategy, stand up, and give the president the advice and counsel that I believe he needs and he could get from that team.
I mean, Senator, if I can paraphrase what I've heard out of the Trump White House, basically it's that sometimes when you upset the apple cart in, say, Iraq or Libya, there are other bad repercussions. So maybe the devil you know is best to live with.
Well, that contradicts everything the United States of America has stood for throughout our history, particularly the 20th century. It was Ronald Reagan that gave assistance to the Afghans who were able to prevail and get the Russians out of their country. We stand for freedom and we help people who are being persecuted and murdered. That does not mean we send the Marines. It does mean there's many ways of assisting, including the court of public opinion. One of the things that won the Cold War was Radio Free Europe. So we just seem to be without a message that has resonated for the last century and should be in this century, and that is the United States of America stands for freedom and help the oppressed and the murdered and those who are being under assault as the people of Syria are today.
One last question on this. France, other countries are trying to tackle this today. They are so appalled by what we're seeing in the aftermath with these pictures. So France is calling for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Ambassador Nikki Haley has just been named as president of that for the month of April. So do you think that there is any possibility of the U.S. coming together with allies and actually taking some action against Syria?
The Russians have veto power in the Security Council, so you'll hear a lot of rhetoric and a lot of great sloganeering from New York.
And that is, as you know, the Trump White House has talked about what they see. Is this business as usual for a national security advisor to ask for a name to be revealed?
Scandal that we have. Look, this is one of the bigger ones that we have seen in a number of years, and that's why we need this select committee to get to the bottom of it. I have great confidence.
Asking for names to be unmasked.
I think one side views it as the scandal on that side, and the other side. That's why we need an overall look at it. I think that the dimensions of it are large. It's far. If indeed there was names revealed, that those people have to be held accountable
for some sort of secret.
And another
talk about how the Senate is now poised to use, quote, the nuclear option to get % majority instead of 60, as had been.
From the people making headlines.
Did you and Donald Trump talk about his Muslim plan?
To what?
2. That extra time ends today. Women earn about 80. At this rate, it will be 44 more years until pay is equal between men and women in America. Even longer for African American and Hispanic women, a lot longer. The issue here is not that women choose lower paying occupations. Even in the same job categories, men make more. Women working full-time in engineering private. Others say more support for working parents, men and...
Hello. Into the heartbreak.
Welcome.
It's the story.